Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new. I hope you're all doing well and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I thought I'd sit down and talk you through some of the best books I've read so far this year. Now we are officially out of quarter one. I have done a whole quarter one stats and every single book I've read video. If you want to check it out, I'll link it above and down below. But today we're just going to centre in on all the books I've given 4.5 and 5 stars to so far in 2023. I would say I've had a really good reading year so far. I haven't hit any slumps, which is always a good thing, seeing how my last year went with reading. So that's great. But when I was looking back and thinking about, what are the best books I've read so far this year, I thought more would come to mind, but only a select few have. I have 5 to share with you guys today, 4 physical and 1 audiobook. I really thought there was more, and I have read some really good books, but none that I kind of would categorise as like the best books, aka possibly ones that would reach the top books of the year at the end of the year. So I like having this video to look back on because I did this in 2021, and then it was interesting to see that those books that featured in the best books so far list also featured in the best books of the year list. So it'll be interesting to see if this pattern happens again with these 5 books, whether they'll reach my top books of the year overall. But enough rambling. So in number 5, I'm going to put I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is the book that I read as an audiobook. Absolutely adored this book. Definitely worth the hype that everyone kind of gave it before I went into it. I kind of just picked this book up on a whim because I needed an audiobook to commute to and from work with, and I was just kind of blown away with how Jeanette kind of told her story. There are major trigger warnings in this book. Eating disorders, bulimia, OCD. There's a lot kind of in her mental health struggle that she kind of really pinpoints. I thought this book was so raw, so emotional, so real, and because she narrates it herself, you could really kind of connect to the story. I thankfully don't suffer with anything that she suffered with, and obviously because she was a child actor and it was her mum that kind of abused her into this role, I can't relate at all. However, this book has kind of like kept me wanting to listen and hear her side of the story, and it was a really interesting book title in the way that she kind of stated, I'm glad my mum died, but kind of seeing that journey from kind of idolising her mum from when she was really young to kind of slowly realising that her mum didn't want the best for her throughout the story, and I just thought it was incredibly told and incredibly written. I would recommend it to anyone who loves celebrity memoirs or memoirs in general, because it is kind of like, it's just a really well written book, and definitely one that's going to stick with me. So that's made my top books so far of this list. So that's the first book that I would title one of the best books I've read so far this year. In at number 4, it's a tough one, but I'm going to go with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I absolutely adored this book, gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, loved it, and once again, really worth the hype. There's quite a lot of hyped books in this list, which shocks me because I'm not usually one to kind of like go into the hype, and I have read the books that are hyped long after the kind of hype dies down, i.e. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was hyped way back when, and I've only just got around to reading it because I don't like going in with like a false kind of idea about the book, which kind of happened with the fine print, which is really, really disappointing because I thought I was going to love that book. It was so hyped and I ended up not enjoying it whatsoever because I think the hype took a lot away from it. And so now I definitely just have learnt my lesson that I can't read hyped books when they're still kind of getting hype. I think it kind of ruins the book for me. So, tangent over. I'm putting this at number 4 because, once again, it was incredibly, incredibly written. I fell for all the characters. It was one of those books where I wasn't really sure on it at the beginning, but as I read more and more, I got more and more engrossed in the story. I felt more and more for the characters, and then at the end, when everything kind of came together and all the storylines and plots kind of all connected into one, I was shocked. It was absolutely incredibly written for that reason of like having all of these intricate woven plot points all coming together as one and having this kind of like big reveal at the end. It was just so incredibly written, and once again, really, really worth the hype. I feel like I don't really need to say what this book is about, but it follows the life of Evelyn Hugo, who is a fictional movie star, and you follow her life from when she was a teenager all the way up until she retires in the limelight of being an actress and marrying 7 times, and you get her story told through each husband that she has. So each husband kind of like dictates a different point in her life, and it was just really well told in the way that it's kind of told through interview format. The audiobook was really well done, and I read in conjunction to the audiobook, so I think that kind of really enhanced it because it was a multicast audiobook as well. Just overall, very, very good book. But I'm not sure it will reach my top books of the year. Obviously, we have another like 8 months left of the year to find new favourites, but I do think this book will be quite forgettable. Like, I love it. It was an incredible read, and I finished it being like, wow, that was phenomenal. But is it kind of like memorable in the stance of like, this is going to be a forever favourite because it won't leave me? I'm not sure. We'll have to see at the end of the year. Coming in at number 3 is Grown by Tiffany G. Jackson. This is the second book I read this year, and once again, quite hyped when it was hyped back in the day. No one talks about it anymore, so I was ready to go into it, and it was phenomenal. This is a YA book that follows our main character, I think it was so long ago, what's her name? Enchanted Jones, who aspires to be a singer, and she goes to a singing audition, and her favourite rap artist kind of sees her in the crowd and kind of points her out as this like really talented singer, which she is, and a really incredible talented singer. However, they start this really unconventional relationship. The rapper Corey Fields starts to privately tutor her, and her family and her think this is like her big break. It's getting tutored by this incredible rap star, and they think it's going to be like the start of her own musical journey. And then he gets very touchy-feely. This book does touch upon sexual assault and rape, and it kind of follows Enchanted as she kind of comes to terms with her fact that her dream that she thought she really wanted and was so close to getting kind of comes crumbling down around her. They start a relationship, and it's very like she thinks that she's in love and he's in love with her, and everyone from the outside can tell that this is a really like wrong relationship and it shouldn't be happening, and people try and pull her out of it. She ends up going on tour with him. There's just like a lot of elements of this book that this book kept me turning the page. It kept me so engrossed, and it was just a really, really incredible written story, and I'm now intrigued to read more Tiffany G. Jackson. I know she has a lot of other work out, but I think this was a great book to start with. It was so incredible. If you can deal with the trigger warnings, I do highly recommend this book. Coming in at number 2, which, once again, I'm shocked. The first book of this series reached my top books of 2021, and the sequel is making my best books of the year so far, and I'm assuming it's going to reach my top books of the year overall. It's A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. This is a fantasy book, which is why I'm like, surprise, because if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I'm not a massive fantasy reader. But I love this series. The more I read of the books, the more I fall in love with it. I loved the first one, and the second one did not disappoint. I thought it was just as strong, if not, I don't know whether it's because I binged it over at Easter weekend, that I just kind of like was so engrossed in the world and so involved in it because I read it in such a short amount of time that I just kind of like fell head over heels with it. But then I also read the first book in one day as well. So technically I took longer to read this book than I did the first book. That's a different story, but I absolutely love this book. I love the characters, and I really enjoyed the fact that this book followed different characters to the first one. So our first one basically follows, it's A Curse So Dark and Lonely. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling following our main character Harper, who gets transported into kind of like this fictional world. She is from Boston, and she gets teleported into this Beauty and the Beast style world where there's a beast ruling the castle, and she's been taken over the threshold into this fantasy world to try and break the curse that this wicked witch has given the beast, aka Ren, aka the love interest. And kind of the story evolves from there, and then this one's a continuation from that. And the fact that Harper wasn't the main character and actually barely featured in this book, I think this shows how well of a how well a sequel of this series is, because you don't follow her, yet you're still so encapsulated by the characters that you do follow in this book, that I just thought it was absolutely incredible. Obviously, I can't really say what this is about because it will spoil the first book and also spoil the second book, but if you have been intrigued to start this series and you're kind of putting it off, highly recommend reading it. It's just one of those feel-good, not that I've read many feel-good fantasy books, but I personally feel like it's a very feel-good fantasy book, and it just kind of makes you be transported to a new world. It's like the perfect mix between character development and relationships, which I love as a contemporary romance reader, but also the perfect amount of world-building and political intrigue for new fantasy readers or people who don't read fantasy very often, aka me, to get your head around and not feel too kind of out of your comfort zone. Yeah, love this series. And Mark was like, why don't you give it 5 stars? And I was like, I just can't give it 5 stars. I gave the first book 4.5 and I gave this book 4.5. But I think overall it's going to be a 5-star series, as long as A Vow So Bold and Deadly does not disappoint me. And in at number 1, as my favourite book I've read so far this year, the book that has stuck with me throughout, every time I think of my favourite books or the best books I've read so far this year, this one always comes to mind. The story has my heart. I loved it to pieces. I listened to it as an audiobook. I went out and got the physical copy. I cannot wait to reread it. It's just the book that stuck with me the most so far this year. It might not be the best written, it might not have the best plot, but it was so unique to me that I never read anything like it before, and I just fell head over heels with it. The Dead Romantics by Ashley Polston. I adored this book so much. This book basically follows our main character, who is a ghostwriter for one of the most popular romance authors in this fictional world, and she is struggling to write the author's next book. And then she gets a new editor, and the editor will not give her an extension even though she has barely written any of this book. She goes into the office and she really tries to push for an extension on a deadline. Unfortunately, she doesn't win, and she goes home expecting nothing of it. And then the next day she finds out that the new editor that she just got, has died. A family emergency occurs, so she ends up going back home. Her family have a funeral home, they look after a funeral home. So when she rocks up at her family's house to deal with this family emergency with her family, the last person she expects knocking on her door is the editor that has just died. He turns back as a ghost, and a romance ensues from there. And it was just so precious. There were so many I just love the writing style of this book. There were so many book references in this book that if you knew, you knew, and it was just I just loved how the book was told. If all ghost stories were written like this, I would fall head over heels in love with all of them, because I just thought the stakes were there in they had very limited time together, and you just kind of fell for them, and you wanted things to work out for them, and you really wanted Benji, the editor and love interest, to stay around, but you knew that he was a ghost and he wasn't going to stay around forever. So I think the forced limited amount of time they had kind of really made you swoon for the relationship even more, because you knew the relationship had kind of a time limit on it. And I just thought that was a really well written part of the story. And the family dynamic, I love family dynamic in books. I thought this family had an incredible dynamic. The fact that yes, it was a romance, but the family featured quite a lot in it as well. Her dad was really into ghosts, and he's kind of the main leader of the funeral home. And how his relationship with her kind of started and kind of developed throughout the story, and also her mum and her sister and her brother. I just thought they all had their moment to shine, even though it was a romance book, and they shouldn't be kind of that centre of attention within a book that's following a romance. But I thought it was just so well woven in, the family as well with the romance. I just absolutely adored this book, and I really want to reread it. And the audiobook is incredible, just to let you know. I actually think she has a new book coming out this year, which I'm very intrigued to read. I have no idea what it's about, but I'm very excited for it nevertheless, because I just loved her writing style. So I feel like I'm going to give all her books a go now. Hopefully she writes more ghost story romances, because clearly I have a thing for them. I absolutely loved it. So these are the best books I've read so far this year, in my personal opinion, including I'm Glad My Mum Died. They're mainly contemporary romances, I'm not gonna lie. We have a romance, we have a kind of contemporary romance, we have a fantasy, and then a YA contemporary, not really a romance because obviously the relationship's abusive, and then obviously I'm Glad My Mum Died, which is a non-fiction memoir. So a little bit of variation, but you can definitely tell my taste has really has definitely shone in this collection of books, because it just kind of sums up my reading taste to a T. Non-fiction memoirs, absolutely adore. A little bit of fantasy here and there, yes please, a little sprinkle, and then mainly kind of contemporary romances kind of have my heart and will always steal my heart. I am having an incredible reading year so far, and I really hope it continues. Let me know in the comments down below what your favourite books of the year are so far to date. I would love to know. Give me some recommendations. Have you read any of the books I've read and talked about today? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a massive thumbs up and subscribe down below to see future content from me. I do anything from sorts of videos, reading vlogs, themed reading vlogs, monthly wrap-ups, monthly TBRs. I have all the bookish content your heart could desire, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more future content. And without further ado, I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.